The ballroom at Almack's was designed for spectacle, and I had become its most reliable one. 4 seasons, 4 years of standing against silk-papered walls in gowns my aunt could barely afford, watching the room rearrange itself around my presence the way water parts around a stone nobody wants to touch. I knew the exact moment the whispers began each evening, approximately 11 seconds after the Master of Ceremonies announced my name. Miss Rosalind Thorne. I could set a clock by the way fans snapped open like shields. Tonight was the opening ball of my 5th season, and I had promised myself it would be my last. Not because I expected anything to change, because I could no longer bear standing still while the world confirmed, in 1,000 small cruelties, that I was not wanted. "Chin up," murmured my aunt, Lady Eleanor Graves, from behind her champagne glass. She was 63, silver-tongued, poor as a church mouse, and the only person in London who still believed I was worth the trouble. "They cannot eat you, Rosalind." "They have been dining on me for 4 years, Aunt. I believe I am down to the bones." She gave me a look sharp enough to cut glass. "Then show them the bones have iron in them." I straightened my spine, lifted my chin, and watched across the gleaming expanse of the ballroom floor as Lord Fenwick, who had courted me for 3 weeks 2 seasons ago before his mother discovered the truth, leaned toward his companion and said something that made them both glance at me and laugh. The truth. That was the word that followed me like a shadow, that had seeped into every drawing room and card party and afternoon call until it was less a secret than a stain. Miss Thorne's mother was common, a merchant's daughter, married above her station through deception, and dead before anyone could punish her for it. The daughter inherited the face and the pretension, but not, unfortunately, the sense to disappear. My mother had been beautiful, brilliant, and born to a family that made its fortune in cotton mills in Manchester. My father, Sir Edward Thorne, a baronet of ancient if impoverished lineage, had married her for love. Society had punished them both. When she died, bringing me into the world, the punishment transferred neatly to me, compounding annually like interest on a debt I had never incurred. Every duke in England had refused me. I do not say this for sympathy. I say it because it is a fact, quantifiable and precise, like a column of figures that does not balance. The Duke of Ashton had withdrawn after his mother threatened to cut him from the will. The Duke of Pemberley had danced with me twice at Lady Clarendon's ball, then sent a note through his secretary, explaining that the match was imprudent. The Duke of Hartwell had not even bothered with a note. He had simply stopped calling, and I had read the explanation in the gossip sheets 3 days later. Miss Thorne lacks the breeding requisite for a gentleman of rank. One imagines the cotton dust has settled too deeply to be brushed away. I had kept that clipping, not out of masochism, out of arithmetic. I was cataloguing my own destruction, entry by entry, because if I could not control the narrative, I could at least keep accurate records. And now I stood in Almack's for the 5th and final time, and the room hummed with the comfortable certainty that Miss Rosalind Thorne would once again go home alone, and the mothers of England could continue using my name as a cautionary tale whispered to daughters who reached above their station. Then the doors opened, and the humming stopped. I did not know him. That was my first thought, that the man standing in the entrance to the ballroom was no one I had encountered in 4 years of ritual humiliation, and I would have remembered him if I had. He was tall, not merely tall, but built with a kind of ruthless architecture, broad-shouldered and lean, as though God had designed him for intimidation and then, as an afterthought, made him handsome enough to be devastating. Dark hair, cut shorter than fashion dictated, a face that was less beautiful than commanding, a strong jaw, a Roman nose, eyes so dark they appeared black in the candlelight. He wore black evening clothes with the easy precision of a man who did not dress to impress, but to signal that he had no need to try. He stood in the doorway, and the room, which had been a river of movement and murmur, went still. "Good God," said my aunt, and her champagne glass stopped halfway to her mouth. "That is Blackmore." "Who?" "The Duke of Blackmore, Alexander Vane." Her voice had dropped to something I had never heard in it before. Not fear, exactly, but a respect so wary it resembled fear's cousin. He hasn't been in London in 6 years. He hasn't attended a ball in... Well, I don't know that he has ever attended a ball. Not willingly. Why do they look at him like that? Because he owns half of Northumberland and a good deal of Parliament, and he has the temperament of a winter storm and the social graces of a cannon. His father was a tyrant. His older brother died under circumstances no one discusses. He inherited the title at 22 and has spent the intervening years making himself so powerful that no family in England dares cross him, and so remote that no family in England can reach him. She took a steadying sip of champagne. He is, by every meaningful measure, the most dangerous man in this room. He was scanning the ballroom, not the way men usually scanned ballrooms, lazily, proprietarily, cataloguing the available women like dishes at a buffet. He was searching. His gaze moved across the crowd with the focused efficiency of a man looking for one specific thing, and the crowd, sensing it, parted before him like wheat before a blade. His eyes found mine. I felt it like a physical impact, a jolt beneath my ribs, a catch in my breath, a sudden awareness of my own heartbeat that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with being seen. Not glanced at, not assessed and dismissed. Seen. As though the crowd between us was smoke, and I were the only solid thing in the room. He began to walk toward me. The whispers erupted. I could hear them cresting like a wave. Blackmore. That's Blackmore. What is he doing here? Who is he looking at? Surely not. It cannot be. And beneath them, the sharper, more venomous current. That's the Thorn girl, the cotton merchant's granddaughter. What could he possibly want with her? He stopped in front of me. The crowd had arranged itself in a semicircle around us, maintaining a respectful distance that was really just the radius of their fascination. Lady Ashton, whose son had rejected me 2 seasons ago, was staring with her mouth slightly open. Lord Fenwick had stopped laughing. The Duke of Blackmore looked at me for a long, unsmiling moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was low and rough and certain, the kind of voice that did not ask permission to occupy a room. "Miss Thorne, I wonder if you would do me the honour of a dance." The silence was so complete I could hear the candles guttering in their sconces. My aunt's elbow pressed sharply into my side. I ignored it. I looked up at this man, this stranger, this storm in evening clothes, and I said the only honest thing I could think of. Why? Something moved behind his dark eyes. Not surprise, he had expected the question, but something else. Something that looked, improbably, like relief. "Because," he said, "I have not travelled 200 miles to ask anyone else." We danced. A waltz, which meant his hand on my waist, his other hand holding mine, and the entire room watching as the Duke of Blackmore, who had not attended a London ball in 6 years, led the most refused woman in England across the floor as though she were the only person in it. He danced well. That surprised me. Men built like siege engines were not supposed to move with that kind of controlled grace, but he did, guiding me through the turns with a firm, unhesitating hand, keeping his dark eyes on my face with an attention so steady it felt almost confrontational. You are staring, I said, because someone had to break the silence and it was not going to be him. I am. It is considered impolite. I have never been accused of politeness. No, I imagine you have not. The music swelled and he turned me, and for a moment I was close enough to catch the scent of him. Cedar, cold air, something faintly metallic, like forge smoke. Why are you here, Your Grace? And do not say it is for the dancing. I am here because I received a letter. From whom? From a woman named Eleanor Graves. My feet nearly stopped. I caught myself, kept moving, but my hand tightened involuntarily on his shoulder. My aunt wrote to you. She did. 6 weeks ago. A remarkable letter. 3 pages of very precise fury directed at every family in the Ton. A detailed accounting of the rejections you have endured, and a single request. That I consider meeting you before the season began, so that I could refuse you in private, rather than adding to the public collection. His mouth did something that was not quite a smile. She is an extraordinary woman, your aunt. She did not tell me. She did not expect me to come. Then why did you? The music slowed. He held me in the turn a beat longer than necessary. Not dramatically, not scandalously, but just long enough that I became acutely aware of the pressure of his hand at my waist, the heat of his palm through the silk of my gown, the fact that we were standing closer than the waltz required, and neither of us was correcting it. Because her letter described a woman who had survived 4 seasons of cruelty without becoming cruel herself, he said. And I wanted to see if that was true. The music ended. We stood in the centre of the floor, 300 pairs of eyes fixed on us, and I felt something I had not felt in 4 years of standing against walls and cataloguing my own humiliation. I felt furious. I am not a curiosity, I said, low enough that only he could hear. I am not a specimen to be examined for resilience. If you came here to satisfy your fascination with a woman the Ton has broken for sport, you may leave the way you came. I pulled my hand from his, turned, and walked off the floor. Behind me, the silence was deafening. I made it as far as the terrace before the tears came. Not the gentle, cinematic tears of a woman in a novel, but the hot, furious, humiliated tears of a woman who had allowed herself for 30 seconds to hope. And hope, I had learned, was the cruelest thing of all. Not rejection, hope. Because rejection was a door closing, and you could learn to stop approaching doors. But hope was the door opening just a crack, just enough to show you the light on the other side, before slamming shut on your fingers. Miss Thorne, his voice behind me. I wiped my face with the back of my glove, an unforgivable breach of etiquette, and I did not care, and turned. He stood in the terrace doorway, and he looked, for the first time, uncertain. The command was still there, the breadth and the darkness and the barely contained force of him. But his expression had shifted. The mask of detachment was gone, and beneath it was something unexpected. A man who had just realised he had made a serious error, and was not certain how to correct it. Go away, I said. No. That was not a request, Your Grace. And that was not a refusal. It was a statement of fact. I am not leaving. He stepped onto the terrace. The night air was cold, carrying the scent of rain and the distant clatter of carriages on the square. I owe you an apology. You owe me nothing. You do not know me. You are correct. I do not know you. And what I said in there, about wanting to see if your aunt's description was true, was honest, but it was not the whole truth. And you deserve the whole truth. He paused. May I give it to you? I should have said no. I should have walked past him, collected my aunt, and left Almack's for the final time with whatever scraps of dignity I could carry. But there was something in his voice, something cracked and genuine and deeply, recognisably lonely, that stopped me. "You have 60 seconds, I said. "My brother," he said, "was everything I am not. Charming, easy, beloved. He was the heir, and I was the spare. And our father made certain I understood the distinction every day of my life." His jaw tightened. "When my brother died, a riding accident if you believe the official account, which I do not, I inherited a title I had never been prepared for, an estate in disrepair, and a reputation as the lesser son who would never measure up. I have spent 6 years making myself powerful enough that no one would dare say it to my face, and I have spent 6 years alone, because power is not the same as welcome." The 60 seconds had passed. I did not interrupt. "Your aunt's letter was the first piece of correspondence I have received in 6 years that was not a petition, a legal document, or a social obligation someone hoped I would decline. She wrote to me as though I were a human being. She described you as though you were one too. Not a commodity, not a prospect, not a name on a list. A person, with a spine made of iron and a heart that had every reason to harden and had not." He took one step closer, not threatening, careful. The careful movement of a man approaching something he was afraid of, startling. "I did not come to London to examine you like a specimen. I came because I have spent 6 years in an empty house, and your aunt made me believe, for the first time in longer than I can remember, that there might be someone in this world who would understand what that feels like." The rain began, soft at first, then steady, stippling the terrace stones and darkening the shoulders of his coat. Neither of us moved. "You are getting wet," I said, because my voice had returned but my vocabulary had not. "I am. You should go inside." "I should." He did not move, nor did I. The rain fell between us and around us, and the candlelight from the ballroom threw gold across the wet flagstones, and I stood there, soaked, furious, heartbroken, hopeful despite everything I had learned about the danger of hope, and looked at this man who had come 200 miles because an old woman's letter had made him feel, briefly, less alone. "I will not be grateful," I said. "If you are looking for gratitude, for a woman so relieved to be chosen that she will overlook being treated as a project, I am not looking for gratitude. Then what are you looking for?" "An equal." The word was simple. He said it without decoration, without flourish, without the careful social packaging that men of his rank used to soften their meaning into harmlessness. "I am looking for a woman who will argue with me and challenge me and tell me when I am wrong, and not be afraid of me. Your aunt's letter suggested you might be that woman. Your behaviour this evening has confirmed it." "My behaviour this evening consisted primarily of shouting at you and walking away." "Yes," he said. "It was magnificent." I laughed. I did not mean to. It was startled out of me, pulled from somewhere beneath the armour and the arithmetic and the 4 years of practised composure. A real laugh, raw and surprised and loud enough that someone inside the ballroom turned to look. His face changed when I laughed. The severity softened, the dark eyes warmed, and for one moment, brief, unguarded, devastating, he looked like a man who had forgotten what it felt like to make someone happy, and was remembering it in real time. "May I call on you tomorrow?" he asked. "You may call on me," I said, "if you come through the front door, remove your hat, and ask my aunt's permission like a civilized person, instead of whatever this was." "Agreed." "And if you ever again describe me as a subject of study, I will ensure your remaining years in society are significantly less comfortable than your previous 6 years of solitude. Also agreed. I turned to go inside. At the door, I paused. Your Grace, Miss Thorne. Thank you for the dance. I did not look back, but I heard him exhale behind me, a long, slow breath, like a man setting down something heavy. And the sound followed me through the ballroom and into the carriage and all the way home. He came the next day, and the day after, and the day after that. Each time he arrived at precisely 2 o'clock, the earliest acceptable hour for a social call, with his hat in his hands and his manner stripped of the terrifying grandeur he wore in public. In my aunt's cramped parlour, with its faded wallpaper and mismatched chairs, and the tea service that had been repaired so many times it was more glue than porcelain, the Duke of Blackmore became someone else entirely. Not smaller, never smaller, but quieter, more careful. As though the room required a gentleness he was not accustomed to offering, and was learning, visit by visit, how to provide. He brought books. Not flowers, books. The first day, a volume of Mary Wollstonecraft that he set on the table with the defiant air of a man who expected to be challenged. I was told you have opinions, he said. I should like to know if they are any good. They are better than yours, if your opening gambit is any indication. My aunt, seated in the corner with her embroidery and her lorgnette and an expression of barely suppressed glee, said nothing. But I saw her needle pause, and I saw her mouth twitch, and I knew she was mentally composing the letter she would write that evening to every woman who had ever pitied her for sponsoring the Thorne Girl. We talked about Wollstonecraft. We disagreed about property rights, agreed about education, and argued so fiercely about the moral obligations of inherited wealth that my aunt finally set down her embroidery and said, "If you two intend to continue shouting, I shall require more tea." We were not shouting. We were leaning forward in our chairs, faces flushed, speaking with the breathless intensity of two people who had spent years with no one to talk to and had suddenly, intoxicatingly, found someone who could keep up. The second visit, he brought a treatise on agricultural reform and a question about my mother's family. Not the question I expected, not the veiled, social question about her origins, her rank, her fitness. A real question. Your aunt tells me your grandfather built his fortune from nothing, that he started with a single mill and ended with 12. I should like to know how. My own estates are productive but inefficient, and I suspect a man who built 12 mills from nothing understood efficiency in a way that a duke born to land does not. I stared at him. In 4 years, no one, not one single person in the whole vicious machinery of London society had mentioned my mother's family as anything other than a source of shame. And here was this man, this feared, solitary, impossible man, asking me to teach him what my grandfather knew. He kept records, I said, when I could trust my voice. Meticulous records. My mother inherited the habit. She tracked every expenditure, every yield, every efficiency. She used to say that sentiment was a luxury and arithmetic was a survival skill. She sounds formidable. She was. And you inherited more than her face. It was not a compliment in the way men usually offered compliments, draped in flattery, aimed at vanity. It was an observation, precise, direct, and offered with the same respect he would give a fellow landowner or a member of his own council. I felt something loosen in my chest that had been clenched tight for years. I did, I said, and I am not ashamed of it. No, he said, you should not be. By the third visit, the entire ton knew. The gossip sheets had seized on the story with the frenzy of dogs catching a scent. Blackmore courting the Thorne Girl. The Duke no family dared refuse, pursuing the woman every family had rejected. The beast and the wallflower. The cannon and the cotton dust. The metaphors were predictably unkind. Lady Ashton called on my aunt the morning after the third visit. I was not present, but my aunt recounted the conversation with the relish of a general describing a victory. "She came to warn me," my aunt said, her eyes bright with vicious satisfaction. "She said Blackmore was dangerous, that his attentions would ruin you further, that associating with him would confirm every suspicion about your character. She said, and I quote, 'A woman of Miss Thorne's unfortunate background cannot afford to attract the wrong sort of attention.' And what did you say?" I said, "My dear Lady Ashton, your son rejected my niece because he lacked the spine to defy his mother. If you believe the Duke of Blackmore suffers from the same deficiency, I invite you to tell him so yourself. I understand he is at home on Tuesdays." I laughed until my ribs ached. But Lady Ashton was not the real threat. The real threat arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 hours after the Duke's fourth visit, in the form of a man I had never met and a name I had hoped never to hear again. Lord Meredith, the Duke of Blackmore's uncle. The man who had managed the Blackmore estates during Alexander's minority and had, by all accounts, spent those years enriching himself at the dukedom's expense. He had been removed from his position when Alexander came of age, publicly and without mercy, and he had spent 6 years nursing the wound. He came to my aunt's parlour. He was a handsome man gone soft, fair-haired, florid, with the particular cruelty of someone who has lost power and blames everyone but himself. He did not remove his hat. "Miss Thorne, I shall be brief." He did not sit. He stood in the centre of the room and looked at me as though I were an insect pinned to a board. "My nephew's attention to you is an embarrassment, not merely to his family, but to his title, his estate, and his position. You are the granddaughter of a mill worker, the daughter of a woman who deceived a man above her station into marriage. You carry tainted blood, and you will not carry it into the Blackmore line." My aunt rose from her chair. "You will leave my house this instant." I am not finished. Lord Meredith did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His cruelty was perfectly modulated, perfectly calm. The practiced weapon of a man who had spent a lifetime destroying people from the inside out. "I have in my possession letters, correspondence between your late mother and your father, written before their marriage. Letters which reveal that she was already carrying a child when the wedding took place. The implications, I trust, are clear." The room tilted. I gripped the arm of my chair. "Those letters are forgeries," my aunt said, her voice shaking with rage. "They are remarkably convincing forgeries, then, and the gossip sheets will not require a court of law to find them persuasive." He turned back to me. "End this, Miss Thorne. Tell my nephew you have changed your mind. Walk away quietly, and the letters will never surface." "And if I do not?" "Then, by Friday, every drawing room in London will know that your mother was not merely common, but ruined. And you, the bastard daughter of a disgraced union, will be finished entirely. Not merely refused, erased." He left. I sat in the silence of my aunt's parlour and felt the walls closing in. The old, familiar walls of rejection and shame, and the sick certainty that no matter how straight I held my spine, the world would always find a way to break it. "Rosalind." My aunt's hand on my shoulder, firm and warm. "They are lies." "It does not matter if they are lies. It matters if people believe them." "Then we must tell Blackmore." "No." The word came out harder than I intended. "If I tell him, he will fight. He will destroy his uncle, and his uncle will release the letters, and the scandal will consume us both." He has spent 6 years building his power. I will not be the thing that tears it down. So what will you do? I looked at the table where Alexander's books still sat. Wollstonecraft, the agricultural treatise, a collection of poetry he had left that morning with a note tucked inside that read simply, "For the woman with the iron spine. I hope you find these worthy of argument." "I will do," I said, "what I have always done. I will endure it, and I will end it myself." I wrote to Alexander that evening. A short letter, formally worded, thanking him for his attention and informing him that I had decided not to receive callers for the remainder of the season. I gave no explanation. The letter was perfectly composed, perfectly courteous, and perfectly designed to end everything without giving him a reason to fight. I sent it at 7 o'clock. By 8, his carriage was outside. My aunt opened the door. I heard his voice from the top of the stairs, low, urgent, stripped of every pretence of ducal calm. "Where is she?" "Your Grace, she has asked not to—" "I received her letter. I am not here to accept it. I am here to understand it. Where is she?" I descended the stairs. He was standing in the narrow hallway, too large for it, his dark hair disordered as though he had dragged his hand through it repeatedly, his coat unbuttoned, his eyes, those dark, unreadable eyes, wild with something I had never seen in them before. Fear. Not the controlled wariness he wore like armour. Raw, unconcealed, desperate fear. "You cannot be here," I said. "It is 9 o'clock. There is no chaperone. If anyone—" "Tell me why." "I explained in my letter." "Your letter explained nothing. Your letter was a masterwork of evasion, polite, precise, and entirely empty. It told me what you had decided without telling me why, and I will not leave until I know." He took a step toward me. His voice dropped. "What happened, Rosalind?" My name, my Christian name, spoken without permission, without precedent, in a voice that made it sound like something precious rather than something shameful. I felt it land in my chest like a fist. "Your uncle came to see me." Every line of his body went rigid. "Meredith. He has letters, or claims to have letters, correspondence that suggests my mother was— that I am—" My voice broke. I had promised myself I would not break, and I was breaking. "He says he will release them if I do not end our acquaintance, and I believe him." The sound Alexander made was barely human. Low, guttural, pulled from somewhere deep in his chest, not a word, but a sound of fury so profound it transcended language. His hands clenched at his sides, a vein stood out in his neck. For one terrible, magnificent moment, I saw the man the temps feared, the winter storm, the cannon, the Duke who had made himself so powerful that no one dared cross him, and I understood, with perfect clarity, that his power had never been about politics or parliament or land. It was this capacity for feeling, compressed into 6 years of solitude, and now detonating in a narrow hallway over a woman the rest of England had thrown away. "I will destroy him," he said, and his voice was very quiet, and it was the most frightening thing I had ever heard. "No, listen to me. If you fight him, the letters surface. Real or forged, it does not matter. The damage will be done. Not only to me, to you, to the Blackmore name. I will not be the instrument of your ruin. You think I care about the Blackmore name? I think you have spent 6 years caring about nothing else. I spent 6 years caring about nothing else because there was nothing else worth caring about." His voice cracked on the final word, and the crack split something open in both of us. He stood in my aunt's dim hallway, breathing hard, and for the first time since I had known him, The Duke of Blackmore looked not powerful, but lost. Not commanding, but pleading. A man standing at the edge of something he could not control and refusing, absolutely, furiously refusing, to let it end. "I did not come to London for the season," he said. "I did not come because your aunt wrote a clever letter. I came because I have read her letter 40 times, and I have not been able to stop thinking about a woman who has been refused by every man in England and still goes to the ball, who still puts on the gown and walks into the room and stands there with her chin raised while the world tells her she is not enough. Do you know what that looks like from the outside, Rosalind? It looks like the bravest thing I have ever seen. And I will not allow my uncle to take it from you." I was crying. I did not want to be crying, but I was. Not the hot, furious tears of the terrace, but something quieter, something that came from the deep place where I had locked away every rejection, every whisper, every closed door, and told myself it did not hurt. "What would you have me do?" I whispered. "Let me handle Meredith, not with a fight, with the truth." He stepped closer. Close enough that I could feel the heat of him, the barely contained energy, the trembling in his hands that he was not bothering to hide. "Your mother's marriage was legitimate. Your birth was legitimate. I know this because I have already had my solicitor investigate your family's records, not to judge you, but because I intended to marry you, and I wanted to ensure no one could use your past as a weapon." He paused. Let the words land. "I have the parish register, the marriage licence, your baptismal record. Every document Meredith's forgeries would need to contradict. And I have something else. 6 years of my uncle's financial records from his time managing my estates. Records which reveal embezzlement significant enough to transport him." You investigated my family?" "I prepared to protect you. There is a difference." "You intended to marry me? After 4 visits?" "After the first dance. The visits were merely the process of accepting what I already knew." His hand rose, slowly, carefully, giving me every chance to step back, and his fingertips brushed the curve of my jaw. The touch was so light it was barely there, and it undid me entirely. "Rosalind Thorne, I have been alone for 6 years because I believed no one would want the man behind the title. You looked at the most feared duke in England and shouted at him in the rain and walked away. And I have not been the same since." I caught his hand, held it against my face, felt his pulse hammering against my palm, fast, unsteady, utterly at odds with the composure he projected to the world. "If you do this," I said, "if you expose your uncle and marry me, the ton will never forgive it. The cotton dust, remember, it settles too deeply to be brushed away. Then let it settle. I have no interest in a world that would refuse you." His thumb traced my cheekbone, and his voice dropped to something raw and reverent and irrevocable. "I choose you. I choose you over the title, over the name, over every drawing room in England. I choose the woman with the iron spine and the arithmetic and the laugh that I heard once in the rain and have not stopped hearing since." I kissed him. Standing in my aunt's narrow hallway, with the wallpaper peeling and the floorboards creaking and the sound of my aunt discreetly closing the parlour door, I kissed the Duke of Blackmore, and he kissed me back with the full, devastating force of a man who had finally found the one thing in the world more powerful than his own solitude. The exposure of Lord Meredith was not dramatic. It was surgical. Alexander's solicitor presented the evidence to a magistrate on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, Lord Meredith's assets had been frozen. By Friday, the forged letters, which a handwriting expert dismantled in a written affidavit so thorough it was later cited in a legal textbook, had been publicly discredited. By Saturday, Lord Meredith had left England for the continent, and the gossip sheets, which had spent 4 years feasting on my humiliation, discovered that the Duke of Blackmore's fury was a far more compelling story than Miss Thorne's shame. The Duke of Blackmore married Miss Rosalind Thorne on a bright morning in September, at a church in Mayfair that was so crowded with onlookers that the verger had to lock the doors. Lady Ashton did not attend. Lady Whitmore did not attend. Lord Fenwick, who had laughed at me across the ballroom floor, sent a wedding gift that Alexander returned unopened, with a note that read, "Miss Thorne, the Duchess of Blackmore, does not collect tokens from men who lacked the courage to offer them when they mattered." My aunt wept through the entire ceremony and denied it afterward with magnificent conviction. We went north. To Blackmore, the real Blackmore, not the title but the place. A vast estate in Northumberland, grey stone and green hills, and sky so wide it made London feel like a drawer someone had forgotten to open. The house was enormous, austere, and had been unloved for so long that the gardens had gone feral, and the library smelled of damp. I catalogued the library first. It was in worse condition than I expected. Water damage, misfiled volumes, an entire shelf of agricultural records that had been deliberately mislabelled during Lord Meredith's tenure. I corrected them. I reorganised the household accounts, using the methods my mother had taught me, the methods her father had used to build 12 mills from nothing. And within 3 months, the estate was running more efficiently than it had in a generation. Alexander watched me work, with an expression I'd come to recognise. Half admiration, half bewilderment, wholly besotted. "You are reorganising my life," he said one evening, standing in the library doorway, with his arms crossed and his dark hair falling across his forehead. "I am reorganising your shelves. Your life will follow." "It already has." He crossed the room, took the ledger from my hands, set it on the desk with the careful deliberation of a man who had learned that the best things in his life happened when he stopped being careful. And he kissed me. Slowly, thoroughly, with the confidence of a man who was no longer afraid of joy. While the autumn rain streaked the windows and the fire crackled and the estate settled around us like a house remembering what it felt like to be lived in. On the desk, beneath the ledger, lay the first book he had ever brought me, The Wollstonecraft, dog-eared now, annotated in both our handwriting, the margins filled with arguments neither of us had won, because neither of us wanted to stop having them. I had been refused by every duke in England, and the one they all feared had walked through every door they'd closed, taken his hat in his hands, and chosen me. Not because I was beautiful, not because I was suitable, not because I was grateful, because I was worth the argument.